Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at historical developments within music, and I just want to go through about five main eras and talk about some of the key developments that we see within music history. And this is going to be a bit oversimplified and a bit kind of brief, and there's a lot more here. I just want to give you the sense of some of the main ideas. So as you listen to music, you kind of have a general sense of when things are generally happening within music. Just by purpose, right? Today we're going to examine the major developments in Western music. We'll start with the Middle Ages, which is roughly about 900 to 1400, and end with the Romantic era, which is about 1790 to up into about the 20th century. I would like you to know the major stylistic changes and the major composers of each era. And I want you to consider how each era builds upon the ideas of the previous. And so there's this development that's happening within music. Taking a look at the Middle Ages, some of the major ideas that I want you to think about. During the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church governed much of education, art, and music. Most of the time, most people that wanted to be educated or literate were mainly going to a church school. There were really no state schools. So most of the people that were literate during the Middle Ages were either clergy or monks. And so art and music during this time was generally going to be for the Catholic Church. Monks were the main composers, and much of the music came from sacred texts such as the Book of Psalms. Singing was something different from ordinary speech and a way for people to connect with the divine, right? The idea of a prayer from the heart. Songs were sung in Latin, and music during this time was monophonic. We've talked about the different types of texture that a music has, right? Mono means one, phonic is a sound, and unaccompanied by instruments, what is known as plain chant. Notice how the rhythm is not as structured as it will be in later music. It's going to just be a little bit more free form. This was also before composers developed the major and minor scales, so the melody feels a little less predictable, right? So the scales, we talked about that, written in a particular key, gives a musical work a feeling of home or a feeling of structure to it. But most of the composed music during this time were coming from the Book of Psalms, where monks would sing the entire Book of Songs throughout, or Psalms throughout the entire week. And so there were certain moments of each day where you had to sing a specific song. And so I wanted just to show you what these Gregorian chants sounded like. And these come from Pope Gregory. He's generally the one that's attributed to developing musical notation, and so they they named this type of sound after him, was known as Gregorian chants. So as we take a look at this, this is where it's coming from. This is what's known as just the early sheet music, and what you see with this is they're trying to figure out, and this is where it's kind of attributed to Pope Gregory, the idea of musical notation, a way that they can put a mark on a page and someone is able to then replicate that note. And so, as you take a look at this early sheet music, I want you to think about what looks familiar to you. And then again, what appears to be missing, right? And so, just some thoughts to think about, right? As we think about these notes, we could think about, this is a staff, right? So you have the lines and then the space between the lines is the way of kind of plotting out musical notation. We have a little bit of an indication of a measure here with that vertical line, but there really is no clear indication of how long a note is supposed to be held for, right? That's more of a stylistic choice for the singers, and so how long they hold the note for is going to depend upon each individual performance. And so that idea of rhythm is going to be something that happens a little bit later. But also notice how intricate, right? This page is, how much art is actually on this particular page. And so this is pre-printing press, and so each of these had to be hand designed specifically each specific page, right? So each time they would do it, they have to replicate it again and again and again. And so there was a laborious process, and these hymn books are extremely, or were extremely expensive. So I got to go to an exhibit in Florence. They had some ancient musical hymn books. And these are about, just to give you the sense of size, these are about, I would say, almost 3 feet in length, and so these are quite beastly to be able to carry from town to town. But there's not a lot of music. If you look at the actual page, there's not a lot of music on the actual page itself. There's a lot more ornamentation, and so this was one of the hymn books that's closed, kind of leather bound, and then they can lock it up. Let's take a look at what's happening during the Renaissance. Some similar themes that are happening. We're going to see some similar ideas happening, but they're going to also add to, right? So there's going to be some additional development happening during the Renaissance. Although secular music was popular during the Renaissance, most of the music during this time was still sacred. One of the major developments during the Renaissance was the inclusion of instruments in sacred music, and I'll show you an example of that, right? So that was just they were thinking during the Renaissance, how can we make our music more devout, more pious, more religious, right? More of that prayer from the heart. And so they're thinking about adding instruments to it. And we think about this today within the church, and we're like, well, why wouldn't you add instruments, right? An organ seems like it would be a perfect fit for music, but for them, it was something radical. It was something new. It was kind of something mind blowing. It's almost like if someone was to bring an electric guitar and drums to the chapel, our minds would be blown because we're not used to that. And so these are kind of some of the developments, right? Some of the changes that it wasn't necessarily widely accepted at first. It was kind of considered radical, but then eventually it became more commonplace, and now we kind of think of it as just par for the course. Another development during this time was polyphony, right? So again, thinking about the melody and the texture. Poly means many, and phony means sounds, right? So many sounds, and so you're going to have multiple melodic lines presented to us at the same time. So rather than one melodic line, singers sing different parts that blend together to harmonize the music. So let's take a look at one of the musical developments in Kyria in Guillaume Dufay. You'll notice the inclusion of an organ. And then we'll take a look at Josquin de Perez and take a look at polyphony. And notice how the vocal part sounds very similar to Gregorian chant, right? And that, but you just have that inclusion of the organ to make it just a little bit more, I guess, spiritual. But notice how the organ and the vocal part don't overlap, right? They're different sections, and so the Renaissance is still trying to work that out. So as we see within this one, right, there's some elements of Gregorian chant, but then they just have that one little addition, and it was just different for them at the time because generally musical instruments like the lute or something was played in festivals, was played in the court, wasn't brought into the church, and so this is bringing some of that outside secular world into the church, and people were a little bit uncomfortable with that at first, but then they started realizing it does seem like there's something that instruments can add. Wanted to play Josquin des Perez Ave Maria, which is just a musical work to Mary, the mother of Jesus, just to show you their polyphony. So the idea is, if we can add more melodic lines, then maybe that will make it sound more spiritual, right? So again, how do we make it just a little bit more spiritual? So notice the one line, and then the male part comes in, male voices come in, and then another one, right? Then we'll have the tenor, and then we have the bass that accompanies the sopranos. So again, it sounds a little bit like a Gregorian chant, but there's a lot more texture happening here. I think we need to bring back Gregorian chants for the church. That would be awesome. All right, let's take a look at some kind of, as we continue our discussion of music history, let's take a look at some other works that demonstrate some of the major developments. You may notice that you may be familiar with several listening examples that we're going to take a look at. This is by design. I've chosen specific ones that you're a little bit familiar with so I can build upon your previous knowledge, right? Research shows that it is best to start with prior learning when learning something new. This helps people to learn new concepts faster and understand them better. So you may have heard some of these works before. However, today I'm going to invite you to listen to them and observe the progression of the melody, right? So just wanted to kind of throw that out there so that you can apply your past knowledge with your kind of application with that, with what we've been taking a look at with music and music elements. Taking a look at the Baroque era, which roughly is about 16 to 1700, about that 100-year period. It was during the Baroque era that Western music became more developed and complex. And started to sound more like what we're familiar with. Composers developed the major and minor scales, and that's really what provides that structure that we're familiar with, which makes a work have a central structure to how it sounds. Bach was the main composer of this era, and is regarded as the best composer in the Western world because he starts to standardize that major and minor scales. He complicates the melody, making it sound very busy because he'd like to overwhelm the listener with complexity. Notice how listening to a work by Bach is like having a conversation with 5 people simultaneously. However, it's little changes in rhythm and dynamics, and so those changes in rhythm and dynamics are really going to start to become more developed later. His work, what he's seeking to do is to try to provide more structure to the melody, but also complicate it by adding this polyphony to it. Let's take a look at Fugue in G minor. And so I've outlined the kind of the listening here of what's happening within the melody. So as you listen through this, you can kind of chart what's happening at what given time. So melody is introduced by a single line of the organ. Melody is complicated by the introduction of a second melodic line. long note there is the coda to kind of wake people up to let them know that they need to clap, right? So the idea of that punctuation at the end, but he introduced that melody to us, and we're listening to that melody to continually come back again and again. I wanted to go through one more Bach piece. This is Brandenburg number 3. And again, wanting to think about what the melody is doing. And again, I have it kind of listed out here within the time. So you know I'm kind of mapped out what the melody is doing for you to follow along. Repetition of the melody with the harmony. This is what we're going to be listening to. Repetition of the melody with a slight variation. The violins are trying to correct the melody, right? Echoes, rather, cellos are echoing those efforts. Decrescendo. Alto crescendo. Comes the melody back. Status quo being restored. Sounds like Thomas So Bach really standardizes a lot of Western music, providing that structure, providing that sense of harmony, that sense of creating something around a central key that gives it a certain sense of predictability, and focusing more on the melody, making the melody more pleasing to listen to, and trying to tell that story within it. Let's take a look at some of the developments happening during the Enlightenment, which is a period roughly between 1750 and 1790. Music Enlightenment, known as the Classical Era, returns to a simple melody rather than the kind of complex melody that we see with Bach, where it's like talking to five different people. And the first one that I showed you, we have to remember that, or the first one I played for you, have to remember that he was playing this on an organ in a time before that there were electrical organs, and so there was some young boy that's trying to pump air into the pipes in order to get enough air through it, and so you got to imagine people are trying to pump as much air as they can through these pipes, so he can play all of that complicated melody. And what we see during the Enlightenment is they want to return to simplicity and harmony. The Enlightenment was an age where Apollonian ideals were celebrated. Moderation and control were key during this time. Music follows this pattern. Music, like, reflects the era in which it was created, much like art and literature, right? Artists are reflecting the world and what the values of the world are, and so music is going to follow that pattern. The melody is more restrained and simplified rather than using polyphony to overwhelm the listener. Like the Baroque era, composers of the Enlightenment present one melody at a time. Additionally, they harmonize the melody, right, adding tones that flow with the melody to provide auditory texture. And so what they really want to do is they want to simplify the melody to make it just a very simple character that you can follow through, right? Not to necessarily overwhelm you, because if you're listening to Bach, it's very beautiful, very, it has such historical importance. But sometimes listening to it for more than 10 minutes, that you become so overwhelmed with your senses that they start to shut down. And so they wanted to find more ways to be pleasing to the listener. Composers also tease the audience with slight variations of the melody, and by slightly varying the dynamics, right, how loud or soft, or the rhythm, how fast or slow it goes, to create listener interest, right? So that's the main thing, is to try to create music that's pleasing to the listener. The listener constantly looks for the melody to return. So let's take a look at a couple of them. Let's take a look at Haydn and his Symphony 94, also known as Surprise, and you'll find out why it's known that in just a minute. Oh, hang on. Here we go. Melodies introduced by strings, played softly. Melodies repeated. It's almost like the audience is lulled to sleep. Surprise. Crescendo, right? So changing the dynamics of the work, which we didn't necessarily see with Bach. it all stayed pretty much the same how loud or soft it was. But now he got us on one surprise. Now what's the audience doing? We're listening to make sure that he doesn't get us again. Creating interest. I was reintroduced with strings playing different parts. I was playing with a slight variation. For teasing low, powerfully. Right, soft and loud. It was complicated. Now it almost disappears. Playing with the dynamics, we're constantly.
But the problem is it's sucking juice from mine. Isn't that weird?
Super. These faint, very light, and soothing. So what we see during the Enlightenment is that they perhaps felt that Bach's way of composing was too academic, and they felt that maybe if we can just simplify it and focus on that one melody and just kind of teasing out that melody in different ways, we can make it more interesting, more enjoyable. Focusing on restrainment. That restrainment is what makes something beautiful. It was what makes something ideal. I wanted to introduce Mozart to you by taking a look at one of his manuscripts. This one is in the National Gallery, or sorry, the National Library in London. And if you notice this, right, something to kind of notice, this is very different from the sheet music from the Middle Ages, right? We've kind of stripped out all the ornamentation. It's all just about the notes and and how they're organized. But if you notice this, this is his actual manuscript. So this is what he would be writing on as though it was a journal. And something that stands out to me about this is that there's no mistakes, right? I mean, generally, if you're writing in your journal, you're kind of crossing things out or kind of going back and making some changes. And we don't see that with Mozart's manuscripts, right? It's almost as though he was just dictating the musical notation as though it was coming directly from God or something. He was just kind of writing it down, and he doesn't really go back and doesn't make any mistakes, doesn't make any errors. It's just kind of making it. They can just kind of write it down. If I would say, if there's one particular composer for the Celestial Kingdom, it would probably be Mozart because he's focusing on something that's restrained, something that's beautiful, and something that's very pleasing. And so I want to take a look at one of his works called Ein kleine Nachtmusik, or that's German for a little night music. And I want you to think about these principles of the Enlightenment as we go through this particular work. Introduction, that first melody. Decrescendo. So it's changing the dynamics, making it more interesting. Crescendo, right? Melodies looking to we're going to see an introduction of the second melody, but notice how the two melodies are not played simultaneously. Here's the second melody. Played softly. Second melody is repeated. So it's going to have a more second melody is going to be developed. Return of the first melody, greater fourth. Return of the second melody. This is almost like a love story between the two melodies, one and the other. And there's going to be some complication as the two melodies that first melody, so notice that with Haydn, right, what he's mainly doing with his Symphony 94 or Surprise, he's mainly changing the dynamics, right, the tension between loud and soft. What Mozart's doing within this particular work is he's just changing one melody and then the other melody, and then those two providing some type of contrast between one another. Let's take a look at the era of Romanticism, and this will be the last era that we'll take a look at for this lecture. Roughly between 1790 and again getting into a little bit into the 20th century, the Romantic era was an era where Dionysian ideals were celebrated. Emotion, intensity, excess were common values in art and music. Additionally, composers and music in general began to be taken more seriously during the Romantic era. Romantic composers were regarded as artistic geniuses because of their ability to express their emotions in music. To achieve this, composers displayed greater variations in dynamics and rhythm to give their works a sense of urgency and excitement. And so they're taking the ideas that are presented during the Enlightenment and just going to have greater variations. And so you're going to see greater contrast between loud and soft, or greater contrast in how fast or slow a particular work goes to create more intensity, to create more emotion. Let's take a look at Beethoven and his Symphony Number 5. You guys have heard this before, but what he's going to do, what I want you to do is within the first 19 or so seconds, I want you to count how many times he presents the melody to us. And what he does is he takes that idea that of Mozart and Haydn, the idea of a simple melody, and he makes it even simpler, right? So he's going more extreme, and so he boils down that melody to 4 notes, and you're going to get that 4 notes throughout the entire work, right? He's only going to give you 4 notes, but he's going to change the way it's presented to you so it creates that interest, but it's a very simple melody in that sense. And so within the first 19 seconds, I want you to count how many times you hear that boom, 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 right? Here we go. Hang on. Here we go. Okay, within that amount of time, how many times did you hear the bum, 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 right? It was 12, right? 12 times in 19 seconds, he gives us the melody again and again. And I want you to think about that as you go through, right? How he's giving us those same 4 notes again and again, but he's doing it in such a way that it creates this auditory interest. As repeated faster and faster, greater intensity. Now the brass plays the melody, and echoed by the strings. Gradual crescendo. Repeated 5 times. Beethoven said that this was his hero piece, right? And what he's arguing here is that fate comes knocking on the door. Don't have a bomb. Fate. The question here is whether the hero has the ability to choose his own fate, or are we determined by some greater force? Then we have that decrescendo. It's almost like the hero's on the ropes. His life's being stomped out by fate. He's fighting back. Single woodwind plays a variation. It's almost the hero has died. Yet there's still a heartbeat. Rose develops, his friends echo each other until the return of the melody. That's really what we're looking for. We want that melody to return. Notice how it's still going 2, 3, 4. Variations and dynamics, moments of silence with moments of growing intensity. Strings echo each other. Hero would be victorious. This is the celebration of free will, right? That our ability to rise above what someone else fates for us, right? The idea that human passion, human determination can overcome. Let's leave off by taking a look at Wagner. His name is pronounced with a V because he is German, and in German the W's are pronounced as V. So don't say Wagner, say Wagner, and here we're going to see the Flight of the Valkyries, and the Flight of the Valkyries comes from Norse mythologies, and Valkyries are goddesses that would come down, the goddesses of war that would come down and select who lives and who dies on the battlefield. And so this is what Wagner's interpretation of war sounds like. What you're going to hear is you're going to hear this idea of cannon fire as you're going to kind of listen to it in the distance, and it's going to then hear this return fire. So I want you to think about kind of he's capturing this battle scene as we go through. So some ideas or images to think about, and then you're going to hear these kind of mythical sounds of coming from above that decides who's going to live and who's going to fall on the battlefield. Introduction to the strings. Brass is playing the board. What's interesting about this one is the melody is introduced by the brass. Power, grandeur, battle. The idea of this bump of the bomb is the cannon fire. Marching across the field. Melodies repeated. Strings playing the undercurrent. Melodies repeated. Gradual decrescendo. There's a feeling of falling, like the falling soldiers, things coming from the sky, choosing who lives and dies, but also the falling soldiers coming down to the ground. Crescendo, repeated melody. We're going to hear the percussions. Marching on the battlefield. Feeling the falling. Return melody. Gradual crescendo. of the melody. Much like what we saw with Kleingeld, there was no catharsis, and there is no catharsis, if I can say it, with this one because war is not. You're not going to end up in the same place where you started, right? That there's things that significantly change during war. But what we see during Romanticism is they say that music should be entertaining. It should be fun. It should be immersive, and right. So we been taking a look at some of the major developments in music history that got us to this point where music is much more structured and immersive experience for the audience. And I just want to leave off with this one. The history of music, right? So maybe you can follow along with some of the themes that we've focused on for today.
Hildegard of Bingen, Palestrina, Antonio Vivaldi, Antonio Vivaldi, Antonio Vivaldi, Antonio Vivaldi, Antonio Vivaldi, Antonio Vivaldi. Frederick Handel, George Frederick Handel, Frederick Handel, Frederick Handel, Frederick Handel. Beethoven, Mozart, von Beethoven, Chai, 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 cough, 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 ski, 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 Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky, chai, 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 cough, 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 ski, 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 Tchaikovsky. Richard Strauss, George Gershwin. Debussy, Claude Debussy, we We meet again. That was goofy, right? A little goofy to start out your day? I'm starting out my days.
We'll stop there, but hopefully you're able to take a look at those musical elements that we've talked about throughout the week and be able to apply them to the musical history that we've been examining.